Lawmakers return to Washington with a full legislative plate and a House Speaker facing significant headwinds.
I will not tolerate a Speaker of the House that I voted for to sell us out.
Arizona's Supreme Court revives a more than century-old law banning nearly all abortions in the state. President Biden announces a new plan to help millions of Americans dealing with student loan debt.
By freeing millions of Americans from this crushing debt of student debt, it means they can finally get on with their lives.
And Congress pays tribute to real-life Rosie the Riveters with the nation's highest civilian honor.
We helped our country win the war. We also helped save the world.
Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Allie Rogan. Politics in Washington is never dull, but as Congress arrived back to Capitol Hill this week, Speaker Mike Johnson faces a particularly long list of priorities to tackle, a razor-thin margin in the House, and the looming threat of his own ouster. Lisa Desjardins has this report.
It's been a cold spring in Washington, beautiful, but for the House of Representatives, delicate and uncertain, with echoing sounds that are the most daunting yet for the new House Speaker.
I will not tolerate a Speaker of the House that I voted for to sell us out.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene in a town hall in Tunnel Hill, Georgia, again made it clear she wants Mike Johnson out.
I will not tolerate this anymore.
Greene has filed a potent bill, just one sentence declaring the speakership to be vacant. In other words, removing Johnson. She's not yet forcing a vote, but it's a threat.
The bill is passed.
One issued last month after she and scores of Republicans broke with Johnson over the compromise deal to keep government funded.
That is not the way to do business.
Beyond spending, Johnson has other dilemmas. There's the border. Conservatives decry a lack of progress, though nothing can pass both chambers right now. There's FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Key powers are expiring next week, and Republicans are divided. Then there's Ukraine and Israel, with increasing calls for conditions on Israel aid. And if Johnson proposes Ukraine funding, he risks direct fire from a large group in opposition.
He's really kind of standing at the dike trying to plug holes right now. So I have tremendous sympathy for my good friend, Mike Johnson.
John Fleming's now the treasurer of Louisiana, but over a decade ago, he was part of the Tea Party movement and a founder of the Freedom Caucus. He defends the sharp motion to vacate.
I think Democrats, to their credit, they fight hard, even when they're underdogs, even when they're in the minority. They fight hard for their policies. I can't say that about Republicans. Republicans oftentimes give in way too quickly.
But the problem for Johnson is that he has some members who want to fight, but he has a bare majority. He doesn't have room to maneuver, nor does he have good troop morale.
We live in a time of divided government. Democracy is messy. Sometimes it's very messy. This is part of that process, and we're going to keep steady hands at the wheel.
Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene do not want steady, they want their way. And she's using the tight margin in the House right now to try and get it. In just over a week, that vote gets even one vote tighter. That means to pass nearly anything, including Ukraine funding, it must be bipartisan. However, if Johnson pushes bipartisan bills, it would take just 2 or 3 Republicans to take away the majority from him as Speaker. Democrats could help him survive with their votes, but that would spark another major problem.
I think it's a really, really untenable spot to be put in, to be propped up by the opposition.
Eric Cantor is a former House Majority Leader who lost to a Freedom Caucus opponent. He says if Johnson survives thanks to votes from leader Hakeem Jeffries and other Democrats, that would undermine Republicans running in primaries across the country. Cantor also sees the problem Johnson faces against all or nothing tactics from within the party.
I think that's really important, to never, ever sit here and just throw your hands up and say we're going to be part of the destruction caucus and never get anything done.
You use the phrase destruction caucus.
For some, there is, and they've been quoted as such, saying nothing that Washington does is good. And I sort of questioned to myself, how is it that you want to be elected and serve in Washington if you say it's all bad?
For Speaker Johnson, who may control the fate of Ukraine aid, FISA reauthorization, and most any issue in Congress at the moment, the question is, can he find a way to get anything done and also survive? For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
On Wednesday of this week, right-wing GOP lawmakers challenged Johnson's efforts to extend part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. For more on the drama surrounding Speaker Johnson and how it is affecting Congress's packed agenda, Amna Nawaz spoke with Leanne Caldwell of The Washington Post and Stephen Fowler of NPR.
Lawmakers, one of their top priorities now that they're back in Washington this week, is to pass that critical aid for Ukraine that they say they desperately need in their fight against Russia. The holdup here is in the House. It's among House Republicans. Speaker Mike Johnson has a razor-thin majority. Is Ukraine aid his priority to pass, and will he get it done?
So Speaker Johnson says that he's going to take it up. In what form, we don't know. It's probably not going to be this week, probably next week. But the thing is we don't know exactly what Speaker Johnson is going to do on Ukraine. He is discussing with the White House, trying to negotiate to try to create a bill that is more palatable to his conservative Republican conference. But the White House is insistent that the Senate already passed a bill, bipartisan, and with 70 votes, and that is the path forward, because the politics are becoming much more tricky as every day passes, not just on the issue of Ukraine from the right, but now on the issue of Israel, which is attached to this bill from some members on the left.
Stephen, one of the plans we've heard, and we don't have a plan, as Leanne says, is he could separate aid for Israel from aid from Ukraine. That would allow Republicans who want to back aid for Israel to vote for that and not have to vote for aid for Ukraine. But it means that they would rely on Democrats to pass Ukraine aid, and that puts Speaker Johnson in a very tricky position. He could lose his speakership, or at least be threatened to be removed from his speakership for that. How do you look at this? Is he going to lose his job on this?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has a town hall tonight where she's saying that the majority is unhappy with the way things are run, and she's threatened his job over the issue of Ukraine and Israel and really how he's handled himself so far. And so this is a fractious majority, and this is a majority that individual lawmakers are holding more sway over the issues, but it's not about the issues themselves. And so what I'm looking at it is this, what's going to happen with Ukraine aid and Israel aid isn't necessarily about the specific aid to those countries themselves, but more about what this narrow Republican majority is trying to push itself moving forward and what direction it's trying to go.
What is that about then, Lee? I mean, we have to remember there was a time there was broad bipartisan support for Ukraine to give them whatever they needed in their fight to defend themselves against Russia. How did this become so political?
It sure did become political. Part of it is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been a voice that has been more skeptical of sending foreign aid to other countries. That is a part of it. But then you have the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the House just yesterday, Mike Turner, a Republican, who said that he believes that Russian propaganda has infested some members of the conversations among members of his party, that Vladimir Putin has been effective at pushing those messages that some in the Republican Party and Republican media have adopted. And so this is becoming a much more tenuous issue, especially as billions and billions of dollars are being requested to send overseas.
How do you look at it, Stephen?
Well, I mean, this is a thing where many voters that support Donald Trump resonate. Donald Trump's message of focusing more on domestic issues are resonating. You see immigration as a top issue both in Congress and on the campaign trail. And here you have these two high-profile international conflicts and billions of American spending. And the conversation has shifted more towards, if we're spending the billions of dollars there, why aren't we spending it here? And so with domestic issues in play and with domestic issues at the forefront for a lot of voters, I think that is a more effective cudgel against looking at it instead of thinking about, obligations to our allies.
Stephen Fowler of NPR, Leanne Caldwell of The Washington Post. Great to have you both here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abortion is one of the key topics facing Democrats and Republicans this fall. Sentiments on both sides ratcheted up this week after Arizona's Supreme Court revived a 160-year-old law that will soon make the state the latest with a near-total abortion ban.
Arizona's 2022 abortion ban is extreme and hurts women. And the near-total Civil War-era ban that continues to hang over our heads only serves to create more chaos for women and doctors in our state. As governor, I promised I would do everything in my power to protect our reproductive freedoms.
Carter Sherman, who covers reproductive health for The Guardian, spoke with Jeff Bennett about the decision.
So the Arizona State Supreme Court lifted a stay on this 1864 law that was passed before Arizona was a state. Help us understand how they arrived at this decision.
So this ban has been the source of court battles and chaos since the overturning of Roe almost 2 years ago. What happened is, after a very long period of litigation, the Supreme Court of Arizona decided today that since there is no more Roe v. Wade, there is no reason why this 1864 ban should not go into effect. Now, what's unclear at this point is when exactly that ban will fully take effect and be enforceable in the words of the court. Abortion providers and their supporters are at this time really trying to figure out what this decision means for all the people on the ground in Arizona.
How is it that this Civil War era law supersedes the previous law that the legislature passed and the previous governor signed in 2022 that made abortion accessible up to 15 weeks?
When the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide in Roe v. Wade in 1973, that meant that there were several laws across the country that dated back decades that were no longer going to be in effect. And many of these laws were never really truly dealt with. They just went dormant. And so when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe in 2022, suddenly all of these states, including Arizona, had to deal with these so-called zombie laws that they had not ever really fully reckoned with. Arizona had also, in 2022, passed a separate 15-week abortion ban. But what happened was that 15-week abortion ban and this near total abortion ban from 1864 just sort of coexisted, and they weren't really harmonized in any kind of way. In this case in particular, Planned Parenthood has argued that these laws needed to be harmonized, and that's why that the 15-week ban should be allowed to stand over the 1864 ban. That's not the argument that the Arizona Supreme Court accepted today.
Well, in the meantime, Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays says she will not prosecute any doctor who performs abortion procedures. Mays says that this is a collective effort with the state's governor. How is that being received by county prosecutors who could potentially use their own discretion?
I think that there are many, many questions about what it really means for an official like Mays to say that she will try to hold off on any kind of prosecutions of abortion providers. The providers that I've talked to and have heard from don't necessarily feel like they are totally in the clear at this point, and they are confused about what it means moving forward if they were to provide abortions.
What's the expected impact on women's health care in Arizona and in the surrounding region?
Arizona has been a critical release valve for places like Texas, which have a total abortion ban on the books right now. So if we ban abortion totally or almost totally in Arizona, there's going to be plenty of people throughout the Southwest who previously might have fled to Arizona for abortions who will now have to travel even farther out. Abortion rights supporters also say that this could have massive impacts on things like maternal mortality. So there's going to be really wide-ranging effects really across the region in a variety of health areas.
And there's also the political impact. Arizona, as you well know, is among a handful of key battleground states. An effort is already underway right now to put a measure on the 2024 ballot that would enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. How might this affect not just the presidential election, but that key Senate race, that hotly contested Senate race in Arizona?
I think that this decision today is going to make Arizona one of the biggest battlefields, particularly in abortion, but also in the presidential race, also in the Senate race in the 2024 elections. What we're looking at here is a potentially very galvanized population outraged by the overturning of Roe, outraged by a near total abortion ban, and those people might decide to go to the polls en masse and vote not just for abortion rights, but also for Democrats. There's actually been, since the decision came out today, many Republicans in the state saying, you know, this was a bad idea. I don't support this decision. And some of them have said that they will work to try to figure out a way back to this 15-week abortion limit and not the near total abortion ban. I've covered this issue for many years. I've covered it long before Roe was overturned, and I have never really seen this sort of immediate 180 from Republicans in this way on this issue.
That is Carter Sherman with The Guardian. Thanks so much for sharing your reporting and your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.
Former President Donald Trump this week reaffirmed his support of Roe v. Wade being overturned, but released a statement where he softened his stance on the most hardline abortion restrictions. And in a back and forth with reporters, he called Arizona's upcoming state ban, quote, too extreme.
Sir, Mr. President, did Arizona go too far? Did Arizona go too far? Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you
know, it's all about states' rights, that'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly.
Would you sign the national abortion ban if Congress would you sign it? You would sign it.
President Biden, meanwhile, called Arizona's ban cruel and vowed to continue to fight for the restoration of Roe v. Wade. He also continued to push for additional student loan debt relief this week. On Monday, he announced new plans to cancel student loan debt for millions. Lisa Desjardins breaks down how this could help some of those borrowers.
So this is President Biden's broadest attempt at student loan debt forgiveness since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down his previous effort more than a year ago. Is that right?
That's right, Jeff. The administration did not give final details of their plan today, but they did outline executive actions that they're teeing up. Those would eliminate at least $20,000 in accrued interest for those who owe more than their original loan, offer more for those with lower incomes, cancel remaining debt for anyone who has spent 20 or 25 years, depending on the loan, repaying their loans, and void loans from college programs that were proven to be deceptive. Biden spoke about the move today.
By freeing millions of Americans from this crushing debt of student debt, it means they can finally get on with their lives instead of their lives being put on hold.
Danielle Douglas Gabriel covers the economics of higher education for the Washington Post and joins me now. Danielle, the White House says some 23 million Americans could be affected by this and a financial boost for them. Help us understand, who exactly does the White House think this helps?
Sure. So the vast majority of federal student loan borrowers could see some relief under this plan. And it's important to note there are many facets to the plan, 5 categories of borrowers in total. But perhaps the largest category that could deliver relief is the one that eliminates up to $20,000 in student loan interest from a borrower's balance. This is pretty common that borrowers may have borrowed, say, $20,000, but because of the way interest accrues on student loans, could owe twice as much over the lifetime of their loan. So this proposal would really help those folks. And the White House is saying about 25 million people will benefit from that part, but 23 million of that 25 could get their interest completely eliminated under this plan.
As you indicate, this is a complex proposal, and in part that's because of the Supreme Court's previous decisions. The Biden administration trying to put something together that they think can remain legally intact. But help us understand, with all that complexity, when could this actually go into place?
So what's interesting here is that most of us have been watching this law, and keep in mind that the regulations started to be crafted right after the Supreme Court struck down Biden's last attempt at this large-scale debt relief. But we thought, many of us, that the full regulation wouldn't be implemented until next summer. But the Biden administration has zeroed in on a couple of elements that they could do earlier. Most importantly, the interest reduction piece, which the administration says they could likely push out this fall ahead of the election.
We talked about the benefits to many millions of Americans, but let's also talk about the costs. They too could be substantial. Now, we know that the Biden administration has boasted that it canceled about $146 billion in loans. That's from previous programs that they implemented. Now, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, when you add in the pauses in debt relief and other Biden programs that they've put in place, it's more like $600 billion by their estimate that has been spent so far in student debt relief. And we don't know how much this new program will cost. Some, like Louisiana Republican Bill Cassidy, have repeatedly argued that this is a wealth transfer from those who have college degree to those who have college degrees.
Where is the forgiveness for the guy who didn't go to college but is working to pay off the loan on the truck he takes to work? What about the woman who paid off her student loans but either bought a less expensive home but is now struggling to afford the mortgage that she has? Is the administration providing them relief? No, nada. Of course not.
Danielle, how's the administration respond to that idea that this wildly runs up the national debt to just give a temporary boost to a very select group of Americans?
You know, the administration has said in the past that the economic benefit of forgiving debt could be tenfold, right? People are freed up from having to make those payments. They're more likely to return money to the economy in the forms of purchasing homes, purchasing cars, spending more in general. I mean, certainly we did see some boosts during the 3.5-year pause of federal student loans in terms of home purchases before interest rates really started to skyrocket. And perhaps that certainly could be the case if we were to see broad broader debt relief. But yes, the cost of these programs has been up for debate, as well as the utility, because it's not beneficial to all American taxpayers. But I think it's important to note that the vast majority of people who have student loan debt have debt and no degrees. There are about 40% of people actually. And so these are people who started but didn't finish, and they are dealing with this debt, most of whom are struggling with it and see no way out. So I think that's really what the president and his administration is trying to get at, trying to help those people who didn't really get to see the benefit of their education.
This, of course, was part of a 2020 Biden election promise, but we are yet again in a presidential election year. And as you said, a big chunk of this they hope to implement before the election. Can you talk about the politics at play here for the voters that the Biden administration might be concerned about?
I mean, it's certainly not surprising that the administration is touting all of the president's accomplishments on student debt, cleaning up a lot of programs, existing forgiveness programs that weren't operating well, and helping to deliver that $146 billion that you mentioned earlier. And it's certainly not surprising that they are touting this particular plan. You know, many of us who cover this were hoping to see the final rule issued this week. The Department of Education said it's coming in the coming months. We will see something, and of course there will be public comment on that. But you know, I suspect, and I'm not a politics reporter, but I do suspect that as we near the election, you will see this administration continuing to highlight and uplift the work that they've done to help borrowers, particularly young borrowers, who are an important part of the coalition.
Now, let's talk about the future of this in the courts. As soon as this rule comes out, do you think there could be an injunction against it filed immediately? Do you think that this is clearly on strong legal grounds? What's going to happen?
I mean, certainly it's on stronger legal grounds from what experts are telling me than the previous rule, because it's backed by a different authority. The Higher Education Act, which governs pretty much all of higher ed in terms of financial aid and all of those things, is the anchor for this. Whereas the other rule was based on a 9/11 kind of emergency power rule that, you know, the Supreme Court didn't really think met the smell test. So in this instance, I think it will be a little harder to see an immediate injunction because this went through a negotiated rulemaking process. The rule is going to come online next July, regardless of who's in office. There will likely be challenges, and it's certainly, if the Trump administration were to win, they could choose not to enforce the rule. They could also choose to try to rescind the rule. So that is also a possibility to think about.
Danielle Douglas Gabriel, thank you so much for your reporting on this.
Thank you.
And finally, a special ceremony at the U.S. Capitol this week honored a group of real-life Rosie the Riveters more than 80 years after their service in World War II. John Yang brings us some of their stories.
The call came clear. Wake up, Miss America.
Some of them went to work in factories during World War II to join the war effort. Some to help make ends meet while their husbands were fighting the war.
I have the distinct honor of presenting this medal to Rosie the Riveter.
Today, about 30 of them represented their millions of sister workers at the U.S. Capitol to receive the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest civilian honors. As men went off to war, some 6 million women went off to factories and shipyards, filling the jobs the men had left. Between 1940 and 1945, women in the workforce went from 27% to nearly 37%. They were dubbed Rosie the Riveter, celebrated with an iconic poster, a Norman Rockwell painting, even a popular song.
She's making history, working for victory, Rosie the Riveter.
At age 17, May Cryer went to work as, what else? A riveter on the B-17 assembly line at Boeing's plant in Seattle. She says she wanted to do her part in the war effort.
I was Rosie's riveter. We became very patriotic, and we did what our country needed, and just so proud of what we were doing. And it makes us proud to realize that we not only helped save our country, we helped save the world.
And she says she was sending a message across the Atlantic.
I love to tell the story what Hitler said. He said he wouldn't have any trouble defeating America because American women couldn't produce. He said we were soft and spoiled. We spent too much time on cosmetic and frivolous things. I think we showed Hitler what American women were made of.
When peace came and former GIs went back to work, many Rosies lost their jobs or returned to more traditional roles. Their service was quickly forgotten.
After the war, everything was for the men, which they deserved. I don't mean to take that away at all. But the men will tell you they couldn't have won the war without what those women built. About 40 years ago, I wanted to recognize the women. I wanted to, so many of our women didn't realize that they were Rosie the Riveters. They would build the engines. They would build the electrical system. They'd build the tires. We couldn't have got that plane off the ground if it hadn't been for those women. And so many of them didn't think that they were Rosie because they didn't fall into that category. It's such a nice honor, and I'm so proud to be able to symbolically accept this medal for all of you.
Today, they got that long overdue recognition.
We're so proud of the women and young girls who are following in our lead. I think that's one of the greatest things we left behind is what we've done for women. I think that's important. To all of the Rosies everywhere, we've gone down in history. Isn't that great? I love that. My last thought is, remember these 4 little words. We can do it.
Now 98 years old, Cryer says she'll never forget the day the war ended nearly 7 decades ago. And now she'll likely never forget the day when she and the millions of other Rosies were honored at the Capitol. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
From all of us here at PBS News Weekly, thanks so much for watching.